it's time to sit back and relax with your favorite drink. And listen.
The CIA sent us to investigate a cave system in Afghanistan by Augustus Cordoba. Part 1. The phone ripped me out of sleep at 2 a.m., tearing through the stillness of my Fairfax County apartment like a bullet punching glass. When the CIA calls at that hour, it means someone with stars on their shoulders or too much power in their pen just woke up sweating over something they can't explain. I'd been their geological contractor for 12 years, long enough to know late-night briefings only came when generals stopped sleeping and politicians wanted answers yesterday. Colin Grimes? The voice was Dr. Eleanor Malone, from the CIA's Directorate of Science and Technology. I'd worked under her before, Ecuador in 2018, Nevada last year, the one nobody's allowed to talk about. Half a dozen other operations where the official reports read like bedtime stories compared to what we actually dug up. Speaking, I muttered, already grabbing the battered notepad that lived next to my bed. Years of chasing secrets buried in stone had drilled one rule into me. Write down everything, especially the details that look useless at first glance. We need you in Afghanistan. Extended underground work, minimum 2 weeks. Your flight's in 4 hours. Afghanistan. The name slammed into me like a fist. Memories I'd spent years drowning clawed back to the surface. My Middle Eastern grandmother's voice, raspy, insistent, telling me stories passed down from her own grandmother. Stories of cursed kings, relics that had toppled empires. Well, I'd once laughed them off as superstition until I saw the way her eyes darkened whenever she spoke of the mountains, as if she knew damn well what slept beneath them. What's in Afghanistan that the CIA suddenly cares about? I asked, though a part of me already felt the answer tightening around my throat. Satellite scans picked up geometric anomalies under Bamiyan Valley. Hollow chambers, nothing like natural formations. Electromagnetic readings don't match anything in our databases. Pentagon's already breathing down our necks. Bamiyan Valley. My grandmother's name for it had been different. The graveyard of kings. She said men went there chasing power and came back in pieces, if they came back at all. She'd whispered of the treasure of Zohak, a relic that crowned men as rulers but always rotted their empires from within, leaving nothing but ruins and madness. I'll need a specialized team, I said, my mind already sprinting ahead, piecing together what this meant. They're waiting, Malone replied without hesitation. Dr. Jerry van der Vorst, our best linguist, fluent in tongues the Earth buried millennia ago. Logan McGuire, field tech, more scars and cave hours than anyone else in the program. Captain Emir Shirzai, Afghan military liaison, knows those valleys better than our satellites ever will. Langley, 3 hours. Don't be late. The line went dead. I sat in the dark, eyes locked on the photo on my nightstand. My grandmother. Taken 3 years before the grave had claimed her. Even in her final days, her eyes carried secrets no woman should have been forced to haul through a lifetime. If you ever find yourself in the Hindu Kush, she'd whispered to me once, her withered hands clutching mine with the strength of iron, remember, some treasures are buried for reasons beyond gold or glory. The earth keeps its own counsel, Habib. Sometimes the dead lie still only because we let them. Back then, I'd laughed it off, chalked it up to the drifting mind of an old woman caught between memory and oblivion. But now, shoving gear into a pack under the choking weight of pre-dawn silence, her words rattled in my skull like prophecy. The flight to Kabul bent time out of shape. Each mile dragged me deeper into a world I didn't want to know. The clean certainty of airports bleeding into the steel-eyed scrutiny of military checkpoints. The cold hum of air conditioning traded for the stink of dust and diesel. Civilian life slipped away, replaced by the thrum of a land that swallowed empires whole, drunk on centuries of blood and ruin. Bagram Airfield. My team was waiting. They looked like a lineup pulled straight from some classified Black Ops file. Dr. van der Vorst, thin, sharp as broken glass, early 40s, an academic predator who spent her life dragging meaning out of dead tongues and dose-chucked ruins. Proto-Indian Iranian-linguistics, a specialty so rare most universities didn't even recognize it existed. But her name carried weight, legend even, among the few who understood that forgotten languages could still cut throats in the present. Logan Maguire was the mirror image of Van der Vorst in all the wrong ways. Young, restless, buzzing with energy, and head over heels obsessed with his arsenal of electromagnetic scanners and ground-penetrating radar. Straight out of MIT, he came to the CIA with a mind that burned too bright, the kind of genius that saw every anomaly as a puzzle begging to be solved instead of a warning screaming to be left alone. His equipment cases looked like they'd been dragged through war zones, scarred from expeditions that never made it onto civilian maps. And in his eyes, that feverish glint, you could see the mark of a man who'd stared at things science had no language for. Captain Emir Sherazai was a different breed entirely, harder to pin down, wrapped in discipline and mystery. Late 30s Afghan army, his face carved by a lifetime in mountains that had shattered better men. His English was flawless, crisp in a way that told of high education, maybe somewhere far from the dust and gunfire. But behind those dark eyes, something lurked. Knowledge, maybe, or secrets he'd never share. He carried himself like someone already burdened by the outcome of this mission. "The locals aren't happy about this," he said flatly as we hauled our gear into reinforced trucks for the trek to Bamiyan. His tone was perfectly neutral, practiced, like a man who'd survived too many rival authorities by speaking in careful half-truths. "My grandmother's village lies close to the caves you want to reach. The stories about those cliffs go back further than anyone can remember." "What kind of stories?" Jerry asked, her voice sharp and clinical, the linguist in her already dissecting every word for hidden meaning. Sherazai's gaze hardened. "The treasure of Zohar." His voice carried weight, a gravity that pressed into the cabin, thickening the air until it felt like stone in our lungs. "They say the cliffs guard a relic older than Islam, older than Buddhism, older than any god who ever claimed this land. Something that gives a man dominion over others, but rots him from the inside. Turns love into hate, loyalty into betrayal, as inevitable as a poison bleeding through water." Logan laughed from the passenger seat, fiddling with the settings on one of his scanners like the story was nothing more than static on a broken radio. His confidence was casual, almost cocky, the faith of a man who thought technology could bulldoze through myth. "Sounds like superstition," he said. "Villagers are probably just scared we'll dig up something valuable, and the government will bulldoze their homes for another tourist trap." I caught Sherazai's eyes in the rear view as Logan kept talking. He wasn't laughing. He looked like a man strapped into a ride straight to his own execution, scared to death, but bound by duty and honor to see it through. The road into Bamiyan cut through land that felt older than gods. Mountains like broken teeth, valleys like scars gouged into the earth. It's the kind of terrain that swallowed empires whole, then waited with the cold patience of stone for the next one to try. Empty hollows in the cliff face marked where the giant Buddhas once stood, monuments blasted into dust in 2001 by zealots too fragile to face Afghanistan's layered, complicated soul. Now the niches gaped like sockets in a skull, staring across a valley that had watched more history bleed out than most continents combined. Sherazai finally broke the silence, pointing to a stretch of cliff that looked identical to 100 others, unless you knew exactly what to see. "Your anomalies sit behind that rockfall, sealed off for centuries, maybe longer." We set camp in the cliff's shadow. It didn't take long to feel why the locals kept their distance. The silence wasn't natural. It was too deep, too deliberate, like the air itself was clenched tight, waiting. Even the wind moved like it was afraid, and when it did slip through the valley, it carried whispers, maybe echoes of long-dead voices, maybe something worse. We dropped down the cliff face as the sun bled out behind the western peaks, each of us hauling enough gear to survive weeks underground if it came to that. The cave mouth lay buried under centuries of debris. Could have been a rock slide, could have been put there on purpose by people who knew better than to leave certain doors unlocked. When we finally pried open the narrow gap, it exhaled. Oh, the air was so old it tasted foul, like the last breath of something buried alive and left to wait in the dark. My headlamp carved a blade of light through the black, cutting shadows that felt thicker than they had any right to be. Murals bled out of the walls, faded, half-rotted stories painted by hands long gone, each layer stacked over the next, civilizations crumbling on top of one another, all pointing to the same truth. The upper chambers bore the marks of Buddhist hands, cells for meditation carved straight into the rock with ruthless precision, storerooms for manuscripts and grain, and walls alive with serene faces that promised truth through silence and surrender. Well, the art was staggering. Monks had painted beauty as if it were prayer itself, a bridge reaching from bare stone to something vast and untouchable. "These paintings," Jerry whispered, her voice carrying oddly in the close space, as if the stone itself was awake and listening. "Kushan period, maybe 3rd or 4th century. But the preservation, it's unnatural, like time bends differently down here." She wasn't wrong. The murals didn't just endure, they glowed. Colors still burned as though wet with fresh paint, showing lotus blossoms blooming out of the rock like frozen explosions, Buddhas staring with eyes full of infinite calm, compassion etched so deep it felt like judgment. Their painted gazes followed us, as if they knew exactly why we'd come, and exactly what we'd unleash. But the deeper we pushed, the more the walls betrayed us. The art shifted, the piece cracked. Buddhist icons gave way to something older and blacker. Murals of kings with crowns that seemed to drip with blood, pigments too vivid, too stubborn to have survived the centuries. Armies sprawled prostrate before towering shadows, the faces blurred or deliberately smeared away, as if the artists themselves were terrified of what they were putting on stone. The stories etched weren't of transcendence anymore. They were of conquest, power, and the ruin that came with it. "Look, the script's changing too," Jerry muttered, running her fingertips over symbols that seemed to writhe in our torchlight. "Sanskrit up top, fits the monks, but here it's Bactrian, and further down..." She paused, leaning closer. Sogdian inscriptions. This place wasn't just occupied, it was claimed, abandoned and reclaimed over and over for more than 1,000 years. The words twisted under the beam, alive with some secret rhythm, as though the stones themselves were waiting for us to understand what should have been left buried. By the 4th level down, Logan's cutting-edge gear was coming apart at the seams. Instruments designed to map the hidden bones of the Earth, machines so advanced the CIA locked their specs behind clearance walls, had started spitting out numbers that made no damn sense. His prized scanner, the one he treated like a lover, flickered with jagged patterns, green lines clawing like insects across the display. Logan cursed under his breath, smacking the side of it, twisting angles, hunting for an explanation that wasn't there. "This is impossible," he growled, voice taut with disbelief. "Localized electromagnetic activity, but the signature doesn't match anything. It's like a power grid. Something down here is alive, generating current. It's running on sources I can't even identify." The deeper we pushed, the heavier the air grew, thick, metallic, coating our tongues, buzzing in our teeth. Every breath carried the taste of iron and ozone, as though the rock itself was bleeding energy. And the acoustics twisted reality. The caves behaved like a colossal instrument, stretching certain noises and strangling others. Our footsteps cracked like gunfire, ricocheting through unseen tunnels, while our voices fell flat, smothered into whispers. More than once I swore I heard voices ahead of us, conversations in languages older than memory, tones carrying the weight of kings and the terror of the damned. We chased the sounds into the dark, only to find stone and shadow and nothing more. But the shadows shifted when we weren't looking, sliding against the rock in ways our lights couldn't explain. "This place makes me uneasy," Jerry finally admitted as we paused, trying to recalibrate the gear that was failing us by degrees. She traced her fingers across carvings in the stone, her eyes narrowing. "The inscriptions don't line up. The chronology is broken. Some of these etchings predate the Buddhist period by centuries, yet they're carved over Buddhist murals, not beneath them. It's backwards. History's stacked wrong here. Shirzai had grown quieter with every level we'd descended. The rigid soldier's mask he wore was cracking, replaced by something rawer. Fear, the kind that chews through bone. When we finally sat down to eat in the husk of a meditation chamber, he broke. His voice was a whisper, but it carried like thunder. My bloodline has carried secrets about this place for 20 generations, he said. Stories passed from father to son, mother to daughter, always ending with the same warning. These are not natural caves. These are prisons, built by Persian engineers who understood one truth, that some things cannot be destroyed, but must never be set free. Like what? I asked, though deep down I already knew. I dreaded having spoken it aloud. The crown, the cursed thing that twists slaves into kings and turns brothers into enemies. A relic buried down here by Darius the Great's master builders after it burned through 3 dynasties in less than a single lifetime, he said. These walls weren't built for worship. They were built as a lockbox and a snare. A labyrinth meant to bury greed and curiosity together, until both rotted into silence. Logan was already shaking his head before Shirzai even finished. His mind trained to slice the world into numbers and data, allergic to anything it couldn't weigh or measure. Captain, come on. We're scientists, not grave robbers chasing some ghosts. Whatever your ancestors sealed up here, it's probably nothing more than a fancy crown or ceremonial trinket that picked up layers of myth over the years. People always dress up the unknown with superstition. But even as he spit out this reason, his scanner was screaming at him. Each step deeper into the mountain, the signals grew sharper, an electromagnetic pulse pulling at us like a compass locked on something buried in the dark. We hit the lowest level we could reach without ropes and gear. Found a wall half collapsed, maybe sabotaged by men who knew better, maybe broken by the mountain itself grinding over centuries. Logan rigged a shaped charge. The blast tore through the blockage, the sound bouncing through the tunnels like the heartbeat of something ancient that had been only sleeping. The dust cleared. Our beams cut through the dark. The chamber beyond hadn't seen the open world since before Christ had walked. The air that bled out was thick with tar and incense, undercut with a metallic tang that made my gut twist. My grandmother's old warnings came rushing back, whispered curses I'd ignored, now ringing in my head like prophecy made flesh. Part 2. The chamber was perfectly round, cut with a precision that had no place in the ancient world. Either someone had engineered far beyond their time, or they'd tools no human should have possessed. The walls were alive with symbols that burned the eyes, not with light, but with geometry that bent in ways flesh and bone were never meant to perceive. At the center sat a stone chest. Its surface writhed with inscriptions that shifted when our lights moved, like they were alive, like they hated being seen. The lid was sealed tight with black bitumen hardened into something like volcanic glass, a barrier that had held for millennia. The whole thing gave off an aura of waiting malice, so old and deliberate that every hair on my arm stood up with a primal warning. Don't touch this. Stay back, Shirzai ordered, voice like steel, carrying the grief of generations who had died to keep this day from ever coming. But Logan was already pacing around the chest, scanner extended, his face lit with obsession. Unbelievable, he whispered, the hunger in his tone almost reverent. This isn't myth. This is science that shouldn't exist. It's putting out electromagnetic pulses, low level, steady, measurable. Whatever's inside, it's either bleeding radiation or creating its own energy field. Well, I can't explain it. Not yet. Meanwhile, Van der Voos was tracing the etchings with gloved fingers, her eyes darting as she pieced together fragments of dead tongues. Her voice trembled the longer she translated, as if the weight of the words themselves were pressing against her chest. He who wears it conquers his foes, she said slowly, but becomes the enemy of all mankind. That which grants dominion strips away the soul. Beware the crown that turns slaves into kings and love into hatred in the span of a single heartbeat. A crown, I muttered, the chill running down my spine like someone had poured ice into my veins. Shazai's face hardened. The same crown my family has guarded against for 20 generations. He paused then, his voice dropping into something darker, heavier. The serpent crown of Zohak. Oh, the old stories say Ahriman himself forged it, the demon of lies, the architect of discord, sworn enemy of everything decent in creation. King Zohak wore it, he stopped being a man. Serpents burst from his shoulders, feeding on human brains, and every friend, every lover, every ally became his sworn enemy. But the crown came first. It wasn't Zohak who birthed the monster. Oh, the crown made him one. It stripped away love, trust, mercy, until nothing human remained. Well, Logan didn't care. He was already pressing a heated knife to the black seal, sweat dripping down his temples, his hands steady with manic focus. "You realize what this could mean?" he muttered, almost feverish. "This is the find of the century. Oh, whoever made this, they had metallurgy and engineering. We're only just scratching the surface of now. And the electromagnetic signature. My God, it could change everything we know about ancient science. Maybe even rewrite physics itself." "Logan, stop." My voice shook, my grandmother's warnings hammering in my head like air raid sirens. Some things are buried for reasons. Some things should stay that way. But the seal was already giving way, splitting along hidden fault lines, centuries of pressure unraveling in seconds. The lid broke loose with a crack that sounded like bone snapping, and air older than empires rushed out, thick with the stench of forgotten incense and something metallic, something dead. Inside, cushioned in silk that crumbled to ash at our touch, lay the most beautiful, most terrible thing I would ever see. The serpent crown of Zohak. A jagged circlet of gold, veins of lapis lazuli burning with a light of their own. Every angle, every cruel curve caught the eye, demanded it, whispering promises of power no mortal should hold. Even under the harsh glare of our headlamps, it pulsed with a malign beauty that made our hearts race and filled our minds with visions of conquest, of control. The craftsmanship was flawless, far beyond its time, but the geometry was wrong. Impossible angles, curves that defied sense, as if it had been shaped by a hand guided by mathematics human minds were never meant to endure. "My God," Van der Vorst whispered, breath snagging in her throat. For once, all her years of language and history meant nothing. She was floored by the thing sitting in front of us. "That's impossible. The metalwork alone shouldn't exist. It rewrites everything we thought we knew about ancient hands." Her eyes narrowed then, uneasy. "But there's something else. The lines are off. The whole thing feels wrong, like it was never made for us." Well, she was right. Couldn't have said why then, but deep inside, something old and wordless recoiled. Looking at that crown wasn't just unsettling. It ripped at instincts carved into bone and blood long before we had language. It radiated menace, beautiful in the way venomous creatures are beautiful, flawless, lethal, never meant for human flesh. Logan didn't care, though. He leaned in, drawn like a moth to a flame. The crown's golden sheen danced in his pupils, and the fever in his stare should have been the only warning we needed. His hand shook as it closed in, not with fear, but with hunger, like he'd spent his entire life unconsciously searching for this moment. "Just for a second," he breathed. His voice already didn't sound right. Undertones curling beneath the words, resonances a human throat shouldn't make. Just to understand, just to see what they were capable of. Think about it, what it could teach us about consciousness, about power, about rule itself. And then his fingers brushed the metal. The chamber shivered. Air temperature crashed a sharp 15 degrees in seconds. Our gear lit up in a storm of impossible data. Numbers bled into alien symbols, strings of inscriptions matching those carved into the chest. Well, the crown wasn't just an artifact. It was alive in ways we couldn't measure, reaching into our machines, talking to them in a language we didn't even know existed. "Hey, we need to get out," I snapped. Every instinct I'd honed in 12 years of fieldwork howled at me. We'd crossed a line and couldn't afford to stay. But Logan wasn't listening. He clutched the crown against his chest like a father holding his newborn, his face stripped of reason and curiosity. What defined him was gone, burned away by something blacker and older, something that had been waiting in that metal for longer than we'd been alive. The night in the upper caves, well, sleep didn't bring rest. Logan began to speak in his dreams. Not nonsense, not mutters, no. Clear words, names. Each one hissed with such blistering hatred it poisoned the air itself. "David Calamar," Logan snarled, his voice twisted into something raw and alien, unrecognizable from the bright-eyed scientist he'd been just hours earlier. "Lying, thieving piece of filth. Stole my work, took the promotion that was mine. Hope he rots screaming." Well, that name hit me hard. I knew it. Kellerman had been Logan's partner back at MIT. They'd split after some ugly dispute over patents and credit. Sure, but Logan had never spoken about it with more than a shrug, maybe a bitter joke at most. Now his words dripped like acid. "Richard Westbrook," Logan spat next, his tone coiled with venom that seemed to bleed into the rock around us. 3 times he blocked me. Said I wasn't ready for leadership. We'll see who's ready when his cozy little kingdom burns to ash. Well, the list kept growing. Each name landed like a curse, fueled by a hate that sharpened with every syllable. Colleagues who'd barely crossed him, supervisors who'd offered harmless critique, classmates who'd beaten him on exams, faces I'd never even heard him mention, all dragged into his whispered tirade, all condemned with a rage that sounded bottomless, as if something was feeding him an endless reservoir of spite. By dawn, our satellite phone hissed to life. The line cracked with static, but the voice that cut through chilled me to the bone. "This is Dr. Malone, Fairfax County Control. We need to speak to Logan McGuire immediately. There's been an accident." His tone was clipped and urgent. One of his former colleagues, David Kellerman, was found dead last night in what's being called the most bizarre accident in MIT's history. Electrocuted. Multiple fail-safes all failed at once. Locked inside his lab, no malfunction, no sabotage, no explanation. Body burned past recognition. I looked to Logan. He was listening intently, a strange smile tugging at his lips. His hands never left the crown's surface, stroking it like something sacred, ignoring every plea we'd made to lock it back in the chest where it belonged. When Dr. Malone asked how Logan was taking the news of his old partner's death, the answer made my blood run cold. "Tragic," he said. But there was nothing tragic in the way he said it, only a quiet satisfaction edged with something worse. Hunger. David was always reckless with power supplies. I warned him years ago about his sloppy safety protocols. He never listened. Some people have to learn the hard way. Well, in the next 48 hours, every single name Logan had whispered in his sleep turned up dead, each one in ways that shredded the limits of logic. Richard Westbrook, broken neck at the bottom of his Chicago stairwell, bones twisted as if hurled by invisible hands. Sarah Channing, choked to death in a Boston restaurant, her meal liquefied on the plate but hardening solid in her throat like poured concrete. Mark Torres, beaten to death in his locked office, the murder weapons his own trophies, bent and bloodied with a force no human could have wielded. Well, the deaths went global. Headlines everywhere, reporters scrambling to piece together a pattern, investigators choking on the impossibility of it all. But none of them saw what was happening underground. None of them would have believed it. In the caverns beneath Bamiyan Valley, the walls began to shift. Each morning the murals were different, the pigments crawling in the dark. More bodies every dawn, more violence, more betrayal. Faces started to appear in the painted mobs, faces that looked too much like Logan. Victims took shape among them, eyes that tracked us through the tunnels, frozen in terror, lips twisted in silent accusation. The air itself was turning against us, heavier every day, wet and metallic, stinking of rust and rot as if the rock itself was bleeding. Our gear unraveled piece by piece, batteries collapsing within minutes, compasses spinning like they'd lost their minds before locking toward the chamber where the crown sat waiting. Logan's scanners spat out readings that clawed at our nerves, flashes of data so wrong they felt like pain. "It's the crown," Shazai hissed during one of our increasingly bitter arguments. "It feeds on malice, twists every slight into a wound, every wound into an enemy, until all you want is vengeance. That's why every empire that touched it fell. The Khorsans, the Ghaznavids, the Mongols, even Genghis himself. They all thought it would make them gods. Instead, it left them hollow, alone, consumed." Logan laughed when we laid out the pattern for him. The sound rattled through the chamber, too loud, too layered, like it was coming from a dozen throats instead of just one. "You're all just jealous," he sneered, eyes glowing gold with the light none of our gear produced. "CIA sent you here to steal it from me, didn't they? Another toy for the military machine. But it's mine. It chose me. And now I finally know what it is." Well, he was changing fast, hour by hour, piece by piece. The eager, curious scientist we'd known was beginning to be stripped away, burned down to ash, and rebuilt into something ancient, something foul. When he spoke, his words carried harmonics that made our bones vibrate. Voices folded inside his voice, a chorus of dead kings and emperors who had once worn the crown and been devoured by it. "What do you think it really represents?" Van der Vorst asked. Her face betrayed the answer already. She knew, and she wished she didn't. "It's not just a crown," Logan whispered, fingers gliding over its twisted curves like a man worshipping skin. "It's a conduit, a bridge, a path to somewhere older, somewhere stripped of lies. It shows the truth, that under the conditioning, under the morality and posturing, we're all predators waiting for the excuse to tear each other apart." On the fourth night, as the winter winds screamed through the valley above our subterranean tomb, Logan finally lowered the crown onto his head. I woke to a sound that will follow me to my grave. It began as a man's scream, raw, human, but it broke and warped as it tore through the caves, splitting, multiplying, becoming 1,000 voices at once. It was everywhere at once, not just in the stone, but of the stone, as if the mountain itself was howling. Pain, ecstasy, something in between that human tongues could never name. Logan stood dead center in our camp when I clawed my way out of my sleeping bag. The crown wasn't just on his head anymore. It had fused into bone and flesh, as if it had sprouted there, grown like a parasite that had finally found its true host. His spine bent backward at an angle that should have snapped him in two, and when he screamed, the sound was no longer his. It was a choir, a chorus of kings and butchers, emperors and tyrants, their voices all braided into one terrible roar spilling out of his warped throat. The world responded. The cave itself shifted in a way that defied every law of nature I thought I knew. The walls began to weep blood, thick streams of it pouring down the stone, soaking the murals until their tranquil Buddhas dissolved into visions of slaughter. And the scenes weren't static anymore. They writhed and crawled when we weren't looking, depicting battles no historian had ever written about, massacres led by men crowned with the very thing now welded to Logan's skull. But the bleeding stone was nothing compared to what clawed its way out from the earth. The ground cracked, and figures dragged themselves out, skeletal monarchs wrapped in rotting robes, jeweled bones clattering as they rose. Their hollow sockets glowed with the same golden fire burning in Logan's eyes. Each one bore the scars of their downfall. Slit throats carved by trusted allies, knife wounds in their backs from sons they'd loved, faces raked open by friends turned predators under the crown's curse. They lurched forward toward Logan, puppet-like, their ruined bodies snapping to attention at the call of their master. But Logan wasn't Logan anymore. The eager young scientist we'd traveled with was gone, burned out of existence. His body was mutating, shoulders splitting along seams that made no sense for human anatomy, his shirt swelling and tearing as something long and serpentine writhed beneath his skin. Each movement pulsed in rhythm with the thunder of a heartbeat that was no longer human. Part 3. "We need to get out," Jerry gasped, panic breaking through her usual calm. But when we pushed toward the upper levels, the way out was gone. Rockfalls sealed every exit that had been cleared just hours before. The mountain was shifting around us in real time, as if it was alive. Corridors warping, ceilings collapsing, stone moving like muscle. It wasn't geology anymore. It was will. The Crown's will. The walls bent sound in strange ways, bouncing whispers through the dark, languages older than history, voices threading through the echoes. Sometimes they coaxed us with advice, spoken in tones that sounded disturbingly familiar. Other times they promised things so vile it made my skin crawl, carrying the cold certainty that something vast and patient was hunting us, content to wait until we broke. "Hey, there's another way," Shazai said suddenly. His military discipline kept him steady where the rest of us were fraying. The monks weren't just hiding down here. They were guarding it, a seal, a cage to keep the crown locked inside. He hesitated and then added, "And beneath their sanctuaries, the Persians built something else." He drove us deeper into the mountain then, through passages we'd never mapped. The descent felt like a spiral into the Earth's molten core, every step pulling us further from the world of the living. The walls were carved with shapes that bled into each other, symbols that made our eyes sting and our stomachs turn. Geometries that shouldn't exist in 3 dimensions and yet stood etched in stone as if daring us to comprehend. "Fire chambers," Shazai muttered as the air grew hotter, heavier and more toxic. The Persians tapped the gas vents, built flames that burned for 1,000 years. Sacred fire, ancient even when Alexander stood here and wondered where it came from. His voice dropped then. "My family's legends say the crown was born in primal fire, and only primal fire can destroy what was forged in the earth's heart." Behind us, Logan followed, but his steps no longer belonged to a man. Each one scraped like claws dragging across stone, and woven within them came the clatter of bone on rock. His skeletal retinue, keeping perfect time, moving with the mechanical precision of an army drilled for centuries. His voice echoed down the tunnels, warping between Logan's familiar tone and the tongues of dead empires, at times splitting into layered harmonies that no single throat should ever have been able to produce. "You can't hide from me," his voice thundered, layered with harmonics that made the stone itself shudder. Dust rained down from the ceiling, pebbles skittering across the floor. "I am every king who ever wore this crown, every ruler who knew the truth. The power is the only law in a world built on weakness and lies. I am Cyrus, I am Darius, I am Genghis Khan, Timur the Lame. I am Zohak, risen from the pit to reclaim what was always mine. The world will kneel to strength, or it will burn in the furnace of its own failure." The chamber spread before us, a natural cavern turned altar by Persian engineers who had harnessed the veins of the earth itself. Gas vents fed flames that had burned for more than 1,000 years, fires older than empires, older than memory, born in the same geological violence that had shaped the planet. Some still guttered weakly in the cracks, fed by reservoirs that might have reached all the way down to the Earth's molten heart. The heat was suffocating, the air thick with sulfur that clawed at our lungs and stripped away reason. "If we can get the crown into the fire," Shazai rasped, his voice raw from the fumes and the weight of old duty, "we can end it, break the curse, free Logan from whatever's eating him alive. But the crown won't go quietly. No, it'll fight back, and it has an army to fight for it." We tried to rig what little gear we had left into a trap, anything to buy seconds, a distraction, an opening to tear the crown from Logan's skull before he was gone forever. But when he finally strode into the chamber, we knew we'd been fools. He was flanked by a skeletal horde, their bones clattering in perfect rhythm. He was haloed in golden radiance so fierce it scorched the air and stabbed at our eyes like knives. Logan was no longer Logan. The crown had grown into him, molten gold threaded into flesh and bone, pulsing with a malignant life of its own. His shoulders had split apart, birthing serpentine appendages that writhed like living whips. Their fanged maws hissed, dripping venom that ate through stone with a hiss and smoke. His eyes were no longer human, slitted, reptilian, glowing with inner fire. And when he smiled, his mouth was a nightmare, rows upon rows of needle fangs, not for chewing, but for ripping, for tearing, for feeding. Behind him marched his legion of the dead, dozens of skeletal monarchs dragged from the vaults of history. Their bones were draped in the rotted tatters of royal finery, crowns corroded and armor eaten through with rust, weapons once used to carve empires now gleaming with impossible menace. They no longer lurched like the twitching marionettes we'd seen above. No, now they moved in lockstep, formation perfect, every gesture coordinated with the precision of an army that had been drilling together for centuries under the command of something that understood war on a scale humanity had never dreamed. You think you can undo what was forged in the Earth's core? Logan's voice was a grinding roar, like stone crushing stone. His throat had been reshaped into something monstrous, built to channel sounds no human larynx could ever produce. I am older than your kind, older than your fragile civilizations, older than the very rules you pretend define reality. I was ancient when the first ape coaxed flame from wood, and I will still endure when your sun glitters out and your world is nothing but dust drifting in the void. The fight that followed was ripped from the marrow of mankind's oldest nightmares, chaos and fire given form. Van der Vorst stood her ground, her voice rising in jagged syllables of forgotten Sogdian incantations. Words of power scorched the air, and the skeletal king staggered if struck by blades of acid, their bones rattling, their weapons clattering from their hands. For moments at a time, their cohesion shattered under her voice. Shazai fought differently, though, through ritual as much as combat. Generations of blood-bound guardians spoke through his hands as he carved sigils into the stone with his knife, geometries that made the air shimmer, pockets of safety where the crown's reach faltered, zones where Logan's army couldn't fully take shape. But the scale of it broke us. We were fighting centuries stacked on centuries, malice distilled into flesh and bone. Logan was no longer a man. He was a channel, a living gateway for a darkness older than civilization itself. His army was without end. For every skeleton we shattered, two more clawed their way up from the stone floor, rising from graves and battlefields scattered across time, pulled into the chamber by the crown's endless hunger for slaves. The chamber itself had become a furnace, not only from the ancient gas flames roaring in their stone vents, but from the hellfire radiating off Logan himself. The heat bent the air until it shimmered with colors that clawed at the eyes, warping vision, shredding thought. My mind felt like it was unraveling thread by thread as I stared into violations of physics and biology that had no business existing in this world. That's when Shazai made his stand, the act that saved us and redefined everything I thought courage could mean in the face of pure corruption. The crown feeds on hatred, on fear, he bellowed into the chaos, his words nearly swallowed by the shrieks of the dead and the roar of flames that sounded older than the earth itself. But love cuts deeper than hate. Courage outlasts fear. My family has guarded this place for 1,000 years. I will not be the one to fail them. He didn't hesitate. Didn't swing a weapon. He just hurled himself at the monster Logan had become. Not to kill, but to embrace. To hold him like a lost brother finally dragged home. Oh, the gesture hit harder than any blade. The raw act of selfless love tore through the chamber like shockwaves, disrupting the crown's stranglehold. The effect rippled outward, a fracture in the dark, as if someone had hurled a stone into still water. Oh, Logan screamed. The sound split the cave, shaking stalactites from the ceiling and driving his skeletal army into spasms of agony. the golden aura around him guttered and dimmed, serpents sprouting from his shoulders, writhing as if scorched by unseen fire. The crown faltered. For a heartbeat I saw him, the real Logan, stripped of corruption, his face twisted in terror at what he'd become, his eyes suddenly human again, wide with shame and pleading for release. That sliver of clarity was all it took. Van der Vorst seized it with the kind of fearless resolve history remembers. She seized the crown with both hands. Her flesh hissed and smoked the instant it met the cursed metal, the stink of burning skin filling the chamber. With the last surge of her strength, she hurled it toward the largest vent of fire roaring in the chamber's heart. For everyone who ever chose love over power, she gasped, her voice shredding as the crown's venom ate through her like acid. For everyone who served instead of ruling. The crown didn't want to die. His will to endure was forged from millennia of hatred, a hunger born from tasting godhood and refusing to let go. Instead of being swallowed by the ancient flames, it flared. Light poured from it, brighter than the sun, turning the chamber's inferno into a pitiful guttering of candles. It pulsed with power that bent the air, twisting reality itself, and the fire that should have ended it instead surged outward in a wave that threatened to burn the mountain's heart hollow. The skeletal horde collapsed instantly, their bones turning to ash as the fires tore through them. Centuries of slavery ended in an instant, but their freedom came at a price. Something worse was stirring. The crown's ruin had unleashed forces bound for thousands of years, and the earth began to quake in time with a massive heartbeat, each thud stronger, louder, more alive. Something impossibly vast moved in hidden spaces beneath us, spaces that should not exist. The floor cracked wide, belching foul ancient air so corrosive it scalded our lungs and burned our eyes raw. Then came the sound, one I will never forget until the day I die. Laughter. Old when the pyramids were new, mocking, amused, patient, the laughter of something that had waited longer than history for this exact moment. Zohak was waking. The crown hadn't destroyed him, it had only broken the chains that pinned his spirit in the dark beneath the earth. Oh, run, Shazai choked, his body broken in the crown's death throes, his voice dragging itself through blood. The crown was just his tether. Now it's gone, he's free, free to rise. And this time, he coughed, his last breath tearing loose. No prison will hold him. The cave was tearing itself apart around me as I staggered forward, chasing shadows of escape through twisting passages that felt less like tunnels and more like the throat of some colossal beast. I wasn't following memory or maps anymore, just raw survival instinct driving me through a labyrinth that wanted me buried. Behind me, something vast was clawing its way up from the kind of depths where the world melts into fire. Every movement of that thing sent shockwaves through the stone, centuries of rock splitting loose and crashing down in deafening avalanches. I caught flashes of it in the glow of the flames as I ran, scales the size of fortress gates catching the fire like mirrors, eyes burning hotter than stars, swallowing every secret this place had ever held. And the heads, the serpent heads of the king demon himself, each as big as a tower, weaving with ancient intelligence and malice so pure it felt like gravity dragging me down. The mountain shuddered with each shift of its rising body, man-made chambers collapsing, walls carved by blood and sacrifice snapping like brittle bones. I made the surface just as the entire cliff face gave way. The mountain roared, vomiting stone into the valley below. The avalanche thundered for miles, like the sound of the world ending. I stumbled clear on legs that barely remembered how to move, knowing in my gut that the collapse wasn't a victory. It was just a pause. The thing beneath hadn't been destroyed. It was still down there, patient, timeless, biding its return. The mountain shook for hours after, tremors that pulsed in a rhythm no seismologist could explain. The rhythm of breath. By the time helicopter rescue teams reached me the next morning, I was 3 miles from the collapse site, half dead from dehydration and exposure, muttering nonsense about golden crowns and serpent kings. They wrote me off as a broken man, my mind shattered by grief and trauma. The official report? A simple seismic event. Rockfall. Tragic but ordinary. 3 team members lost. 1 survivor requiring extensive psychological treatment. A story clean enough to close the file. Convenient enough to bury the truth. But I know what I saw. I know what's still waiting under that mountain. They pulled me off field duty and chained me to a desk in Fairfax County. Officially, it was reassignment. Unofficially, someone high up decided the caves had finally broken me. No more expeditions, no unstable geology, no ancient sites with questionable histories. The CIA brass were polite but unyielding, protecting me from myself, or maybe protecting themselves from what I knew. I didn't fight it. Some truths are lethal in the telling. Some warnings only sound like madness until you've seen the nightmare breathing behind them. For the last 3 years, I've lived in the shadows of that silence, using my clearance to strip every satellite feed and seismic log from the Bamiyan Valley. And the deeper I dig, the worse it gets. The earth there won't stop moving. Tremors are growing stronger year by year, quakes that don't follow the logic of natural fault lines. Patterns emerge, repetition too exact to be coincidence, like someone or something is moving beneath the stone with intent. The locals whisper about screams, voices rising out of sealed caves at night, carrying across the valley in dead languages, words from empires ground to dust centuries ago. The satellite imagery is worse. Stress fractures in the cliffs forming designs too precise to be random. Geometric scars clawed into the rock from the inside, symbols no geology textbook can explain. It isn't just Bamiyan. The sickness is spreading. Sites across Central Asia and the old Indo-European sphere. Dig teams vanish, accidents devour entire expeditions. Always the same catalyst. The unearthing of a crown or something like it. Artifacts that match too closely with the serpent circlet I saw in that chamber. Dr. Yuki Tanaka at the University of Tokyo has been chasing the phenomenon, cataloguing what she calls impossible earthquakes. 17 sites in 18 months, every case the same. Discovery, obsession, then destruction, so thorough that nothing remains but rumors and seismic scars. Well, the data doesn't lie. These quakes aren't geological. There's something else, something alive in the stone, resonances that behave like signals instead of tremors. The patterns make no sense, she told me during a classified briefing last month, and the way her voice trembled, I knew she was lying. She'd seen the same truth I had. The sense it makes is too dangerous to admit. These weren't earthquakes, not the grinding plates or the tantrums of volcanoes. They were too precise, too clean, too damn deliberate. Like some distant hand was answering our digs, answering our greed. Something with the power to bend stone and soil through methods no human mind could even map. Part 4. I wanted to tell her about the crown, about Logan, about the thing in the dark that laughs beneath the bedrock and fattens itself on human hunger for power. A truth like that burns the tongue that speaks it. Some secrets kill faster than bullets, especially when the proof comes from places science won't acknowledge, places that make reason snap like brittle glass. So instead I asked her what she thought was behind these tremors, if she could trace the patterns, predict the next strike. I don't know, she confessed, her voice breaking against the weight of 20 years of research. Her training clashed with the evidence clawing at her senses. I've tracked quakes across the globe, but nothing like this. It's as if the Earth itself is waking up and watching us, reacting in ways it should never be able to. When she left, I sat alone in my Fairfax County office, eyes on the skyline, mind drowning in thoughts older than empires. I thought of cycles, the rise and collapse of civilizations, spiraling tighter, faster, as though rushing toward a catastrophe that would make every fall before it look like a stumble. The old books had warned us. They always had. Kali, Yuga, Ragnarok, the end of days. Different tongues, same prophecy. a breaking point where mankind's venom, its rage, its endless thirst for ruin would rattle the chains of what had been buried since the dawn of history. The chime on my computer snapped me back. A new message. No sender, no trace, no trail, like it had bled out of the circuits themselves. The words shifted on my screen, letters twisting, mutating as I stared. The sleeper stirs in the hollows of the earth. The crown calls to its scattered brood. The reign of kings is ending. The reign of monsters is near. Afghanistan was only the first harvest. My blood turned cold. I wiped the message off my screen the second I saw it, but not before snapping screenshots, not before noting the time. The timestamp hit me harder than the words themselves. Down to the second, it matched the moment I'd been thinking about cycles, patterns, the chain of disasters ripping across the globe. Like something out there wasn't just watching me. It was inside my head, answering my thoughts as they formed. The idea should have been insane, but it wasn't. Not after everything I'd seen. That night the dreams came. Gold, serpents, crowns hissing promises to the desperate and the damned. I was back in the caverns under Bamiyan, watching Logan twist into a shape that had nothing human left in it, while skeletal kings clawed their way out of the stone to kneel before the master they'd been waiting centuries to serve. This time he wasn't alone. There were others, researchers from every corner of the world, each with a golden circlet welded to their skulls, their voices rising in chords no human throat should be able to produce. They weren't worshipping. They were drilling, standing in ranks, soldiers of something ancient. And beneath them, far deeper than any cavern, something vast and patient began to stir, rolling upward toward a world too fractured, too feeble to fight. A world ripe for slaughter. I jolted awake to a sound I didn't recognize at first, a low throbbing pulse, deep and steady, like the earth itself was beating against the building's bones. It shook through me, marrow to skin, a rhythm that lasted 3 minutes and 17 seconds exactly, and then it stopped. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was thick, swollen with menace and promise both, like the planet itself was holding its breath before the knife came down. The next morning hit me with news that blew the floor out from under everything I thought I understood, and nailed down my worst suspicions about the scale of what we were facing. A team of archaeologists outside Damascus had supposedly stumbled on the find of the century, an untouched royal tomb crammed with artifacts older than any recognized Syrian civilization by millennia. The early reports were calling it a revelation, something that would force history itself to be rewritten. The expedition's leader, Dr. Hassan al-Rashid, bragged to the press that the discovery would revolutionize our grasp of human origins in the ancient Near East. But it wasn't his words that upset me. It was the photograph. My hand shook so hard I nearly spilled boiling coffee down my chest. There, nestled in al-Rashid's gloved palms like a newborn, was a crown. Gold, coiled with serpentine patterns, veins of lapis, gleaming like frozen lightning. The same twisted beauty I'd seen before, the same design that had devoured Logan under the rock of Bamiyan Valley, the same lure, the same curse. I tried calling the team. Their satellite photo didn't ring. It spat static, carrying whispers that curled through the line in half-familiar tongues I couldn't place but felt in my bones. I reached out to the Syrian Ministry of Culture. The bureaucrat on the other end swore no such expedition had existed. When I checked for follow-ups, all I found were vague blurbs. Excavation suspended for security reasons. No details, no answers. But digital ghosts don't vanish so easily. I dug into the metadata of the original photo, pulled coordinates the news scrubbers had missed. The site sat in the hills north of Damascus, exactly where my grandmother's stories had said it would be. The Garden of Serpents. A place the oldest text marked as the birthplace of the first king, who learned to despise his people more than he loved his throne. That's when the truth locked in. Governments weren't dismissing these incidents as random archaeological mishaps. They were covering tracks, stitching together countermeasures in the shadows. And the crown in Afghanistan? That wasn't some relic of a forgotten empire. It was part of something older, something that never went away. It wasn't just a relic. It was a node in a network, a chain of artifacts scattered across the earth like pieces of some ancient kill switch wired into the bones of civilization. The crowns weren't symbols of power. They were conduits, amplifiers for everything rotten inside the human spirit. Ambition, greed, hatred. Slip one on your head, and it doesn't just twist your will, it feeds those impulses until they burn away whatever scraps of humanity you had left. Oh, and they're not isolated. Distance doesn't matter. Each crown speaks to the others, whispering across oceans and deserts, sinking their influence to push the world closer to collapse. One wakes and it stirs the rest, sending signals no human ear can hear, waiting for the right spark of desperation, corruption, or bloodlust to tip another into life. And now, for the first time in history, they're all stirring at once. Something has called to them, some condition met, and together they're preparing the world for their master's return. Now, Dr. Tanaka's impossible earthquakes make perfect sense in this light. They're not tectonic shifts. They're messages, communiques between the crowns as they reassert their grip on human affairs. Every collapsed dig site isn't an accident, isn't some tragic footnote in archaeology. It's a success. Another mind broken, another soul drafted into an army that's been gathering since before the first cities were built. I haven't slept in 4 days now. I've been pulling every scrap of data I can, cross-referencing ancient texts with excavation records, pinning coordinates on maps, tracing the line where civilizations rose and cracked apart under their own corruption. Oh, the pattern is flawless, relentless. Every collapse follows the same rhythm, and the tempo has been speeding up since we wired the planet with instant communication and built weapons capable of burning it to ash. This isn't just history repeating. It's the endgame. A cycle that started the moment humans realized it was easier to rule through fear than to build trust. Easier to break men than to unite them. The crowns are accelerants, catalysts engineered to push us towards self-destruction, clearing the board for something older, something patient, that never stopped waiting for its chance to reclaim the world. Every empire that's ever crumbled, every culture that's rotted from the inside out, it wasn't fate, or bad luck, or the weight of contradictions. No, it was always the same. Someone found a crown, someone thought they could bend it to their will, and every time, they were wrong. The cycle has played out countless times before, but always in fragments, in cities, kingdoms, empires that burned out and left survivors to rebuild in the ashes. Well, this time there will be no second chance. All the crowns are awake, and the world we've built gives them power their makers could never have dreamed of. Social media pours gasoline on every spark of hate, turning division into an inferno that crosses borders in seconds. Nuclear arsenals mean a single betrayal can erase millions in the span of a heartbeat. Global finance ties every nation to the other, so rot in one corner spreads like gangrene through the whole body. We've engineered the perfect stage for monsters, and now they're stepping out to claim it. What waits beneath Bamiyan Valley isn't just Zohak, the Serpent King of legend. That name is just a mask, a story to make something older sound human enough to be feared. And the truth is worse. It's the embodiment of our own self-sabotage, the instinct to tear down what we build rather than let someone else profit from it. It feeds on envy, on betrayal, on cruelty. Every time a man chooses to break instead of create, it grows stronger. For ages it slept in the earth's hollow veins, while its crown spread like infections, teaching us to hate, to distrust, to see enemies in every shadow. But the world has changed. The last century gave us the tools to connect across the globe, and in doing so, handed those relics a nervous system faster and stronger than anything their creators imagined. The internet that binds humanity together also links the crowns, letting their poison ripple across continents at the speed of light. Satellites orbiting overhead don't just beam our voices to each other. They've become the scaffolding for a power that was ancient when fire was new, a conduit for its return to dominion over a species that forgot why it ever feared the night. And the worst part? I can feel it inside me. The same hunger that took Logan in those Afghan caves, the pull to surrender, to kneel, to let the dark voice whisper promises I know are lies but still want to believe. Lately, the mirror throws back a face that isn't mine, eyes burning gold, lit from within like coals that never cool. My sleep is filled with whispers in dead tongues I shouldn't understand, yet every syllable cuts clear, offering maps of my colleagues' weaknesses, blueprints for betrayal, perfect strategies to pull them apart piece by piece. Catch myself savoring thoughts of vengeance against people who've never wronged me, drawing up schemes of deceit as naturally as drawing breath, and finding them sweeter than any joy I've ever known. The lapis stone that came in the mail 3 months ago beats in sync with my pulse, its glow deepening whenever rage flares at the blindness of those around me. I locked it in a lead-lined safe, buried under steel and concrete, but its voice still seeps through, promising dominion over every fool who's ever mocked my warnings, every coward who's failed to recognize my worth. It would take nothing, just a moment, to lift it free, to feel what it has to show me. Authority stripped of pretense, weakness exposed for what it is. How easy it would be to cast off the chains of conscience, to shed empathy like dead skin, to become the thing humanity was always meant to be. Predators wearing crowns, masters unshamed of their birthright, a truth older than law or morality. Some are born to rule, the rest to crawl. But I remember Shazai's last breath, the love in his eyes even as the crown crushed him. I remember Jerry burning her hands to ash to hurl that cursed gold into the fire, choosing death over surrender. Their memory drags me back from the abyss, an anchor I can still feel even as the hunger gnaws at me, whispering that hate is easier, cleaner, truer to what we really are. So I write this while I can, while there's still enough of Colin Idris left to fight back, to believe, if only for a little longer, that love is worth more than power, that resistance still matters, that every choice to stand against domination is a blow struck for the only future worth bleeding for. I'm dumping this onto every server I can reach, burning it into formats that might outlast the collapse of our digital age, stashing hard copies in places where scavengers or archaeologists might dig them up after we're done. If history keeps repeating itself, someone will find this. And when they do, this will stand as my warning, my confession. The truth about what happens when something ancient and malignant plugs itself into modern tech, and when human greed arms it with the weapons it needs to finish the job. The grounds, they're real. They're wired into time itself, locked together across centuries and dimensions, and they're winning in ways their first makers never dreamed. Human invention has given them reach, influence, and teeth sharper than anything the old world could imagine. But in that gift, we've also carved out their weak spots. Global networks can spread warnings as fast as they spread poison, if people are willing to swallow the truth instead of the lies that taste sweeter. Science can map the scars they've left across the ages, uncovering patterns too big for past generations to see until it was already too late. The same systems that bind the crowns together also bind ordinary people who can choose unity over selfishness, even when selfishness is the easier path. The war isn't finished. Maybe it never will be, as long as humans walk this earth and keep making choices that matter. But as long as there are people like Shazai and Van der Vorst, people who'd burn themselves out for strangers, who'll pick love over fear even when fear feels like the only sane choice, well, there's a chance to snap the cycle that strangled us for thousands of years. The thing buried deep thrives on hate, feeds on fracture, but it withers in the light of real compassion. The crowns tempt with promises of domination, but they shatter in the hands of those who refuse to rule anyone but themselves. The ancient parasite that spawned them is patient beyond measure, subtle beyond reason, but its leash is short. It can only work through us, and we always can choose to be something better. So this is my last transmission, sent while I can still fight back against the golden whispers drilling into my skull, or I can still resist the lapis stone calling louder with every heartbeat. So remember this: empires crumble, but love outlives them. Kings rot, but kindness survives in the lives it saves. The surest victory over an ancient evil is nothing more than the brutal, stubborn choice to treat others like they matter more than your hunger for power or your need for comfort. And if someday you find a golden crown locked away in a tomb or hidden vault, if it whispers of dominion, of control, if it shows you visions of a world kneeling at your feet, know this: it's lying. About everything but the cost. Oh, the price is always real, and it will take more than you can ever imagine. The only crown worth wearing is forged in service, not conquest. A crown that makes kings of us all without demanding a single bowed head. The lapis lazuli stone throbs in time with my pulse now, each beat hammering faster, hotter, as my mind races with visions of how easily I could bend this broken world into something better, if people would just listen. The lead-lined box that cages it radiates warmth against my palm, almost alive, and beneath the hum I can hear a voice, low and familiar, calling my name in the tones of every teacher who wrote me off, every colleague who stole my credit, every smug bastard who couldn't recognize my brilliance. Oh, how simple it would be to let them see me unleashed, to shed the polite mask of humility and stop pretending I care about the feelings of lesser minds, to take what's mine, to claim my place above them all, and show the world what true leadership looks like. Uncompromised by democracy's weakness, unpoisoned by the delusion of equality. But then I remember Sherzai's embrace, the love in it, the sacrifice. For now, I choose service over dominion. For now. How long I can hold that line, I don't know. The golden voice is pressed harder every day, whispering louder with every betrayal, every murder, every moment when hatred proves sharper than hope. Empires crumble. Malice never dies. Every man is an enemy, waiting only for the right wound, the right spark to bare his teeth. Somewhere in the black veins beneath Afghanistan, something ancient and patient is laughing, counting down the days until its children come crawling back, until the age of monsters begins in earnest. The ground calls, and sooner or later, someone always answers. So, very weird and wonderful one there. Hope you enjoyed that. An hour and a quarter. Oh, not bad. Yep. Recorded that one all in one go. So, as always, brain not working so well, but I get to this point in recording. So, sorry this is a bit nonsensical. But yeah, okay. Interesting story. Really love the theme, location, and all that. Hope it's not true. Anyway, that's your Tuesday evening's entertainment in this early part of September. Oh, it rained like crazy here today, from about 4 in the morning right the way through to the afternoon, so it's been a pretty miserable day. Good one for recording though, so yes, good opportunity. Anyway, I am definitely waffling on a little bit too much here. Thoughts, feelings, anything else you want to share in the comment section below the video, and as ever, I will do my best to join in the conversation. Till the next time, my dear friends, remember it's just a story and sweet dreams. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this story today. Really means a lot to me and to the author of the story, of course. Well, if you want to know more about me, I'm pretty much everywhere on social media. You can find me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. You can download my music on SoundCloud. I've got a Patreon if you feel like. Throw me $1 or $2. Very much appreciated. And of course, on Reddit, I have a place where you can leave stories if you want me to read one that you've written. Well, hoping to see you all again very soon. Till then, sweet dreams. Bye-bye.